Hello, everyone, and welcome to Some Stops Along the Way, your podcast that takes you around the world, introduces you to some interesting countries, people, events, culture, and geopolitical context. It tracks after my memoir of the same name, which is available on Amazon. Hope you have your copy already, but if you don't, I encourage you to get it. I think that it's a pretty easy read, and I think that you would enjoy learning about some interesting countries and some of the people that with which I've interacted with over the years. I'm also going down memory lane a little bit today. I'm rocking my U.S. Embassy Kabul, Afghanistan pullover. Hadn't worn it for a long time, but I don't know whether I was just a little bit nostalgic today or what. But I just decided to wear it. It always brings back good memories whenever I have it on. Well, let's say it brings back memories. I'm not sure all of them are good. Most of them are. Some of them aren't, but still, I like to wear it. I should be proud that I can still wear it after all these years, I guess. Either it was very big when I bought it, or I'm not quite as big as I think I am now. But those of you who know me, I'll let you be the judge. Anyway, we're getting started on a new segment today of Some Stops Along the Way. We have been on the theme of hope and hopelessness. Many of the countries, the very conflicted and troubling countries I've worked in around the world. And today we're going to start a new section, if you will, called Airplanes and Elephants. And it more or less encapsulates the time that I spent working in Asia, both South and Southeast Asia specifically. It was a great time of my life. I've worked in Asia, in South and Southeast Asia, a great deal. I talked about Cambodia earlier, but the time that I spent working in Asia was a real catharsis for me for several reasons. First of all, I think that it's something that as a small child, when I thought of Asia, I always thought about the romance and the mysticism of the Asian continent. And as I got older and had the opportunity to work there, what I found was that it really delivered on my expectations. South and South Central Asia, especially, are fascinating places. They're filled with countries that have an interesting history, great culture. The food is amazing. The people are wonderful. And I'm going to introduce you to a lot of that as we go through this section of my book. And I'm going to start off today with a country that some of you may never have heard of, or if you have heard of it, aren't sure where it is. It's called the country of Bhutan. Bhutan is a tiny country that's nestled in between China, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, that area of the world. Pardon me. And I will be totally honest with you. The first time that I was approached about working there, I had to find it on a map. I had no idea where it was. This was in the late 1990s, and I was contacted almost out of the blue by someone who I only tangentially knew to ask me if I would consider doing a short-term project in this tiny country. Well, I was still running economic development organizations at that time. I was president and CEO of the Colorado Springs, Colorado Chamber of Commerce. And at first I turned it down because I didn't think I had time to do it. But then I started thinking about it, and I talked to members of my board, and they said, this sounds like a good opportunity, and it certainly would be something that would give the chamber here visibility. So why don't you think about doing it? And so I did a little research. I talked to this person again and found out that what they wanted done was fit exactly within my expertise, which was that they wanted to form a national chamber of commerce. They had not had one up to then. And the king at that time was coming up to the 25th anniversary of his reign as king, and he wanted to take small steps, and I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes, but he wanted to take some small steps toward modernization of his tiny country. And so, after giving it some thought and talking to Debbie and Daniel, I decided to do this for what I thought would be a 2 or 3 week assignment. It ended up, of course, like most of them, being more extensive than that, but I initially went for 4 weeks. Just the trip in getting to Bhutan is an experience in itself. Because in my case, I flew from Denver, Colorado to Los Angeles to Osaka, Japan, Osaka, Japan to Bangkok, Thailand, and then transferred to Druk Airlines, which is the national air carrier of Bhutan. Took Druk Airlines to Thimphu, Bhutan, which is to Paro, Bhutan, which is where the national airport is. Thimphu is the capital. Paro is where the airport is. But we had to make a stop in Calcutta, India, along the way. So this was a trip that was like no other that I'd taken up to that time. I mean, multiple legs, different airlines. It was just an arduous task to even get to this little country. I remember sitting in Bangkok waiting to catch my flight on Druk Air. And at that time, I had not been to Bangkok before, and I flew into their old airport. And there was a lot of hustle and bustle, and I was supposed to transit onto Druk Airlines there. I had no idea where Druk Airlines was or how to find them. And so I asked multiple people in the airport who had no idea, finally found the little Druk airline counter and facilitated my travel into Paro, Bhutan. Not even really knowing, outside of that they wanted to form a national chamber, what they were trying to accomplish. Because what I found out later is that the king had a grand design on what he wanted to do, and what I was doing was one piece of that design. Once I was able to see the picture on the front of the puzzle box, so to speak, and understand where my piece fit, it made it a lot easier, and it made the experience very, very enjoyable. So, got on Druk Airlines, flew first to Calcutta, India, where we made a stop. And the Calcutta airport was everything that you would think an Indian airport should be. There was hustle and bustle, and it was old and decrepit at that time. There were people everywhere. The luggage was being brought in on carts that were pulled by guys from the airplane. There were 50s looking vehicles sitting around the airport, old decrepit tractors to haul luggage. It was everything that I thought that at that time that an Indian airport should be. So I wasn't disappointed. I wasn't surprised by that really at all. Even though up until then I hadn't worked in India or traveled in India before. Since that time, I worked and traveled in India extensively. But what really surprised me is when we took off from the Calcutta airport and we began to fly over this massive city of Calcutta, India. In one city, one part of the city was lush and green, and below I could see homes that looked to be very posh, nice neighborhoods, manicured lawns, houses with large walls around them. Very green, beautiful area. And then as we flew past that toward the river, there was an area literally where it looked like a bomb went off. It was the Calcutta that, as a child, I had read and dreamt about. When I was small, I remembered as I was flying that day that I had been involved in a movement that was going to through U.S. elementary schools at that time, where we were providing books for not only young people in Bangladesh but also in India, and there were the opportunity to have pen pals and to link with students in both India and Bangladesh, and I had done that and exchanged a few letters and pictures with students from this area of the world as I was in elementary school. And I developed in my own childlike mind then a idea of what it was supposed to look like. I wasn't prepared for Calcutta to be this lush green city with expensive homes. What I assumed, and what I found most of the city to be, was a huge poverty-stricken landmass where a majority of the population were living far below the area of subsistence that one would expect to live a decent life. So as we flew over that, I continued to think about, as a child, how I had thought about this place and how I had dreamt about being able to go there. And now here I was flying low over the city where I could see both its successes and its failures from the air. When I was a child, we had a very famous missionary in the denomination in which I was involved, named Mark Buntain, and he and his wife Huldah had gone to Calcutta, India in the 1950s and had built hospitals there and had built schools. And I remember listening to Mark Buntain speak about Calcutta and about the work that they'd done there and the crushing poverty that the people lived under. And as a child, I never thought I'd get to see it in real time. And yet here I was, not flying to work in Calcutta, flying to work in Bhutan, but flying low over this place that had been seared into my imagination. And I was kind of lost in thought, I remember, as we were flying over, and a gentleman was sitting across the aisle from me. I was sitting on an aisle seat, and then right across the aisle was a British gentleman, and he and I started to talk. And I found out that he was a consultant with a global organization that you would know if I mentioned their name, but I won't. And he was headed obviously to Bhutan as well. And he asked me what I was going to do there, and I told him, and then I asked him, what are you going to do? He said, well, they want to get more involved in sustainable tourism, and so I'm going in to consult with them on how to develop a sustainable tourism strategy. I said, excellent. How long will you be there? He said, a week. I said, really? You can help them do a sustainable tourism strategy in a week? And he said, oh, all this works the same. He said, I'm writing most of my report in advance because this thing, the strategy works the same around the world. And then I'll put in the parts that are germane to Bhutan when I get there. It saves me a lot of time. And even then, before I was officially in the international development business, I was still running chambers of commerce in the United States. That hit me like a ton of bricks. That here was someone who was going to a country where he had never been, and obviously, just in the questions that I asked him, knew very little about, to help them develop a sustainability strategy for tourism when he knew nothing about the king's vision for tourism. He had not seen any tourist attractions in the country. He was literally going to charge tens of thousands of dollars for something that was a template, that literally was an off-the-shelf product that would mean nothing to the growth of tourism in the country. And I sat in my seat for a long time contemplating my work and the research that I'd already done about Bhutan. And I made the decision then and there that regardless of what country that I was going to work in, if I was actually going to do this, if I was thinking that this could be a profession that I wanted to pursue as far as international development goes, and at that time I was strongly considering moving in that direction. But if I was going to do that, I was never going to be like this consultant across the aisle from me. I was going to do it the right way. I was going to meet the people. I was going to learn from them. I was going to listen more than I spoke. I was going to develop the habit of learning as much about a country as I could. And I was going to leave things better than I found them and always produce an excellent product. And so I'm actually glad I had the experience that day of meeting this man, because it really cemented in me the fact that I wanted to do this thing the right way. And certainly there are others that have a different approach in international development than do I. No problem. There are different roads to the same destination. But the destination that I wanted to end up at, if you will, is one where I left things better than I found them. Where I had the ability to interact with people who could add value to the work that I was doing. And so in a few hours, we navigated the Himalayas. Right out of my window, I could see both Mount Everest and K2 as we approached Bhutan. And this is when I learned the approach to Paro, the airport in Paro, Bhutan, is when I learned how you have to fly into a very mountainous airport that has limited radar and limited ability to, and limited technology, if you will. And that is, you get corkscrewed in. Now, later on in my career, when I went to Afghanistan, this was very common there, that you would fly into an airport in the middle of nowhere, and they would corkscrew you in, and then eventually you'd land on the runway. There, they did it for two reasons. Number one, because of the terrain, but in Afghanistan, they also did it because it made it harder for the bad guys to hit you with a missile from the ground or with AK fire from the ground if they were spinning like this on the way down to landing. In Bhutan, they did it for a very functional reason. It was Paro is surrounded by mountains, and you couldn't take a direct route in. You had to come in and corkscrew around. So as we approached, I looked out the window, and all I could see was green all around me, because the mountains there are very green. It's a tropical climate, and I could just see forest all around me until we were finally on the ground. Now, there's a new airport in Paro today, and it's a very nice airport. It's small but very functional. But I flew into the old airport at that time, and this place was tiny. It was chaotic, and my driver, Sharma, was supposed to meet me. And I go through immigration, I grab my bag, and I walk out of the airport onto the tarmac, and no one's there to meet me. At that time, that was before we walked around with cell phones all the time. And I didn't, even if I'd had a cell phone, it wouldn't have worked in Bhutan, pardon me. So I stood there in the heat on the tarmac for some time. Then it started to rain. I was sitting there on my suitcase. I looked like a sad sack. As a matter of fact, the airport staff felt so sorry for me that they brought me some tea and asked me at least to come into, when it started raining, to come into the area of the airport where I could look out onto the tarmac just to stay dry. But after about an hour and a half, here came this UNDP truck driven by Sharma. There was only one road from Paro to Thimphu, the national capital, and there had been an accident and he had been unable to pass, and so he knew he was very late. He was very apologetic, but that was my introduction to Bhutan. Now, if I fly into some place and there's no one there to meet me, no problem. I just grab a taxi and go to the airport, or go to the hotel rather. Or if I don't do that, then I either have a driver, I have a contact, I just get on my sat phone and I call them and we work it out. None of that was in play there. So I was totally at the mercy of Sharma showing up, which he finally did. We began the drive from Paro, Bhutan, to one of the world's smallest national capitals in Thimphu, Bhutan. And I noticed immediately the beauty of the place. Just driving through the countryside, it was very green. There were rice fields, tiered rice fields up the hillsides. It was obviously not a wealthy country, but one that was beautiful, one that appeared to be well maintained. And the thing that I noticed, even on that drive from the airport in Paro to Thimphu, was when we saw people along the road, they would smile and wave, which was not all that common in the areas where I'd worked up to that time. And so I thought, well, that's very interesting. I wonder why that is. Well, I found out later, and I'll talk about it in just a few moments. But we made that drive, and I checked into this hotel by the river in Thimphu. It was really the only nice hotel in town. There were no international branded hotels. So this hotel was not opulent in any way, shape, or form, but it was comfortable. It was clean. And it appeared that only one other international and myself were staying there. His name was John Atwill, and I got to be very good friends with John. We both worked at the UN office together there in Thimphu. But we were literally the only two internationals staying in the hotel. So I got there, I dropped my bags. It was almost dinner time. The next morning I was going to be at the UNDP office for a briefing and then begin my work with the government officials who were involved in developing this National Chamber of Commerce. But by the time I got there, I was rather hungry because the food on the airplane was borderline inedible. The Paro airport, there was nothing to buy. So by the time I got to Thimphu, I was quite hungry. So I went down to the restaurant, and entire staff in this restaurant, literally nobody in this restaurant but me. I'm the only customer. An entire staff, probably 3 or 4 waiters, a hostess, the whole thing. They were really doing their best to provide great service. So I get ushered in, I get sat at this table. I'm given this extensive menu that was in English, very surprising at that time. And there were some problems with the English, but I could tell what everything was. And I looked through the menu, and then I decided to place my order. But what I found out that first night in Thimphu at that hotel was a pattern that would become the same not only during that trip but my subsequent trips to Bhutan. I had the menu, and I would say, okay, I will take the chicken marsala. And they would smile and say, oh yeah, we don't have that. Okay, no problem. So I would order something else. Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have that. Okay, no problem. So I would order something else. We don't have that either. So finally, I asked the question that I should have asked in the very beginning. And that is, okay, what is it that you have? And waiter smiled very brightly. He said, mister, we have chicken tikka and rice. Great. I'm going to take the chicken tikka and rice and a Coca-Cola. I brought the chicken tikka. It was quite tasty. The rice was very nice. Drank my cold Coca-Cola, semi-cold Coca-Cola, and went to bed. Next morning, I get up, go for breakfast, same thing. First 3 things I ordered didn't have it. Finally, I said, what do you have? And this became a pattern then, every morning. And finally, because I'm a reasonably intelligent person, I would simply go in and sit down and say, what do you have this morning? But that made them feel bad because they wanted to give you the menu. They wanted you to look at all of this food, even though they didn't have it. It was a very odd song and dance, but we did it every single day. And it got to be so funny that John Atwill and I would play off of each other, and pretty soon the entire staff in the restaurant is laughing because of the absurdity of this whole situation. So that first morning, I go down to the UNDP office, get my briefing, meet the government officials that I'm working with, and they give me a tour of one of the world's smallest national capitals, Thimphu, Bhutan. This is an amazing little town. One of the most interesting things to do in the town as far as people watching goes was to sit down at the main traffic circle and watch the very well dressed and very highly respected traffic police meticulously, and I mean meticulously, direct traffic. Now, there wasn't much traffic as it was a small town, but they did their jobs very well, and they had their white gloves and their blue shirts and their navy blue pants and their white caps and white shoes, and they looked great. And the people of Thimphu were very proud of their traffic cops. And so that first day, they took me on this tour. We ended up at this traffic circle and went to a restaurant called Swiss Bakery, which is still there today. Got some food at Swiss Bakery and sat out on a bench at the traffic circle and watched this performance by the traffic police. I thought, interesting. And then I went to different attractions in the city, like the Memorial Chorten, which is the burial place of the former king. And up on the hillside, I could see this large palace. It's called Trashishozong. And that was the king's, that is still the king's palace. So I was intrigued from the very first day by this small city of Thimphu, Bhutan, that I didn't know it at the time, but would become a big part of my career. Not so much because of the project itself, although the National Chamber of Commerce, we were able to create the National Chamber of Commerce. It still exists to this day, and it is going very, very well. I still stay in touch with them. But it was so important in my career is because it created a passion in me to continue this field of international development. If I had any questions prior to going to Bhutan about whether or not this profession was right for me, they were very quickly eliminated. After about 2 or 3 days in Bhutan, as I would wake up in the morning and the city was waking up, and I would walk from my hotel by the river, across the river, down the main street to the UN office, and see the young people playing basketball, and stop and talk to the people on the street, almost all of whom spoke English. I couldn't imagine doing anything else. This made such an impression on me. I remember one morning I was walking from the hotel, and there was a high school, a middle school and high school combination, right down from my hotel, and the students love to play basketball. And so I was walking by, and the basketball spun out into the street, and I grabbed it, and the students are standing there looking at me, and I dribbled a couple times, fired the ball back, and they laughed and continued on with their game. Next day, passing through there, I hear, "Mister." I look up, the ball comes firing down, I catch it, dribble a couple times, throw it back. This happened for 2 or 3 days in a row. And then one day, I can't remember the day of the week, but it was a school day. I'm walking by, and I hear this, "Mister." I look up, and the young man says, "Play with us." And so I went up and spent a few minutes playing basketball with these students at this middle school and high school in Thimphu, Bhutan. Now, something you need to know about Thimphu, in addition to it being one of the smallest national capitals, it has some really unique aspects. Number one, there's a national uniform in Bhutan. People don't wear street clothes or Western clothes like we wear. They wear a national uniform. The men wear a short robe called a go, that hits them about at the knee. Usually they're some type of red, possibly green, plantish color. And they, as I said, they come to about the knee. And then they wear argyle socks and shoes. If you really wanted to ingratiate yourself to a Bhutanese man, bring them a gift of argyle socks. They loved them because that's how they could be unique. They had to wear the national uniform, so bringing them a shirt or a tie or a pair of trousers didn't really make sense. But bring them argyle socks, they loved it. The women wore a long robe called a kira. And sometimes these were made of cotton, usually cotton silk blend. Absolutely beautiful. The kiras that the women wore there were just stunning. And they made them look regal in a way. And so they had this national uniform. And the funny thing about that is a few weeks after I came there on my second trip, which was a lot longer trip than my first one, I saw a poster in the hotel for a fashion show that was going to happen that coming Saturday. Well, this was a big deal for a couple reasons. Number one, the fashion show was featuring Indian fashions, and the Bhutanese really loved Indian fashion for some reason. The second thing is that there wasn't that much to do in Thimphu. It was a small town, so any type of event like this was going to be a big deal. So I talked to John Atwill. We decided, okay, well, we're not doing anything on Saturday anyway, so we'll go. So we show up for this fashion show, and all of the Bhutanese are there. The men in their robes, their goes. The women in their kiras. They have Indian models that are modeling a combination of Western and Indian fashions. The queens are there. I'll get to that in just a minute. And John and I sit there as Western observers thinking, people here are so happy, they're so engaged, they're enthusiastic, but they can't wear any of this stuff. They have a national uniform. So why are we even here? Why is this even happening? It was one of those absurdities about Bhutan that just made you shake your head, but the people were so joyful and happy that it really made you feel good to be there. So that was one of the peculiarities, this national uniform. Another peculiarity about Bhutan was that there were 4 queens. Okay? So the king at that time, his name was Yimi Singhi Wangchuck. And we'll talk more about him later on. But he had 4 wives, the 4 queens. They called them ashies. That was their word for queen. And you would see the ashies around town a lot. Security wasn't an issue, so we regularly saw the ashies around Thimphu. The funny thing about the ashies were that polygamous marriage was not legal in Bhutan. The only person that had more than one wife was the king himself. And evidently, depending on who you believe, there were a lot of stories about this, but he married these women to solidify his power base. And all of them were lovely in their own right. But I'd never been to a country, and I don't think that there's one that I can think of in that area of the world to this day that had four queens. Now today, Bhutan does not have four queens. It has four queen mothers, or four former queens, but it just has one queen today because the King Yemi Singye Wangchuck abdicated, allowed his son to become king, which we'll talk more about in another episode. And he only has one wife. So, national uniform, four queens. And another interesting thing about Thimphu and about Bhutan in general was that their national sport was archery. They loved archery. So one of the things that we used to do on Saturday all the time is we would go down to the archery field and we would watch the archery tournament. Again, maybe not exciting to some, but on a Saturday in Thimphu when there was nothing else going on, watching the archery tournament was quite an interesting thing to do. They also had the Saturday market, so we would go and get fruits and vegetables, and they sold some of their textiles and silks there. I brought some home for my wife. Very, very beautiful in their design and in their fabrication. So here I am in this little town creating something they'd never had before, which was a National Chamber of Commerce. And dealing with all these unique points about the country, the national dress, the four queens, one of the smallest international capitals, but also my first trip there, there was no internet and no television. And there was a reason for that. Because the king was hesitant to open his country to the outside world because of the corrupting, what he considered to be the potential for corrupt influences on the youth in the country. So he really thought through this strategy as to how do I introduce this technology to Bhutan. So he decided on the anniversary of his 25th year as king to launch the internet and the television. And I had the very unique opportunity to stand in the home of the president of the newly created National Chamber of Commerce of Bhutan and watch the television come on for the first time and watch internet begin to work in the country for the first time. It was a surreal experience. Something that I doubt very many other people have had the chance to do. I'm sure it was akin to the same thing in the United States when TV was first introduced and you're transitioning from radio and you're standing there and this box comes on with this picture. The whole family was there. Everyone was sitting in front of the TV. The king came on and gave a short message, and then they started showing an Indian movie. But that was the nature of this king. I respected him highly. He was an extremely intelligent guy. And he was extremely cautious as to how he rolled out things in the country. For instance, sustainable tourism. I told you about this consultant that was coming in to work with them. The king wanted to open the country to tourism, but he didn't want Bhutan to become Nepal, which he considered to be over-touristed and a disaster from a tourism standpoint and an environmental standpoint. He wanted to have a sustainable tourist environment that could be small and controlled and allow people to really enjoy his beautiful country without destroying it. And eventually, he did create such a system. Whereas now in Bhutan, very few people go there a year. You have to pay in advance. You pay a certain amount of money for a 7 or 9 day or 11 day, I believe, package that includes everything. It's tightly controlled. What you bring in, you take out. And it limits the number of tourists, but it creates this unique and beautiful experience in addition to protecting the environment and the culture of the country. And so he was able to achieve his goal by taking things very strategically and very carefully. So that was another anomaly of this country. It was so amazing to see in real time because of all the unique aspects that were in play in this one little patch of earth in between Bangladesh, Nepal, and India specifically. I had the chance to travel extensively throughout the country to places like Bhutan and Trongsa and see this from the Himalayas in the northern part of the country down to the jungles in the south. Even had a brief encounter with a wild tiger, which I'll tell you about in a future episode. But a truly amazing place. Another unique aspect about this was that virtually everyone spoke English. From the young people to the old people. You'd find very few people, especially in Thimphu or Paro, that didn't speak English. And the king had created this value system in the country called gross national happiness. They called Bhutan the land of the happy dragon. They were a Buddhist country and very proudly Buddhist and lived according to the tenements of Buddha. But their mantra was gross national happiness. The king believed that you didn't need huge wealth to be happy. That you needed to have a society that had order and structure, where you had enough, where there weren't corrupting influences, where you could live your life in peace, and you could raise your family in a way that was appropriate to the culture. He truly wanted people to be happy, and that's where gross national happiness came from. And so many times I would walk around the city and someone would come to me and say, "Are you happy?" They wouldn't ask where you're from or where you worked or how much money you made. One of the first things they would ask is, "Are you happy?" And this went from the older to the younger. I remember walking to work one day, and there was in addition to this middle school and high school I was telling you about, there was an elementary school on the way. And the young people at the elementary school, there weren't very many foreigners in Thimphu, and so they would kind of gravitate to me, and some of them would walk with me part of the way to work as I walked by their school. And one day I'm walking by on my way back home from the office, or back to the hotel, if you will, from the office. And there are some girls standing outside of the school, and they're talking to each other, and they see me and they start giggling, and finally one of the little girls comes to me, and she said, "Mister." "Yes?" "We're having a Mayfate dance." I said, "Well, that's great." She said, "We have a ticket book that we're selling tickets to help pay for the dance. Would you buy a ticket?" And this was the cutest little girl, and her little Kira, I don't know how old she was, but maybe 8, 9 years old, I don't know. Just an adorable little girl. I couldn't help myself. So I said, sure. How much are the tickets? And she told me. And the tickets were like virtually nothing. A few US cents a piece. And I said, how many tickets do you have there? And she very meticulously counted them out in English. I think there were 25, 30 tickets maybe. And I said, I'll buy all of them. She was so happy. But I made a big mistake, because then every little girl there with a ticket book came immediately running toward me. And my friend John Atwill's walking by. He wanted no part of that. He said, look, you made the mess. You clean it up. I'm not involved. So I'm surrounded by these little girls, and everybody wanted to sell me tickets to the Mayfate dance. This was just one of the things that was endemic of Bhutan. People that didn't have a lot, but they had enough. Happy. Engaged. Welcoming. Just a beautiful, beautiful place. During one of my subsequent trips there, I didn't live in the hotel. I lived in a guest house that was owned by a man named Mr. Nadik, who was on the board of directors of the National Chamber of Commerce. And his wife, Madam, was something else. She was a force of nature. And this was during monsoon season. And one thing I didn't factor into this whole equation is that their guest house, they lived in the top of the house, and my room was in the bottom of the house. Their family lived in the top of the house. My room was in the bottom. But it was uphill on a dirt road. During monsoon season, that means the whole thing is mud. So one day I'm going from the Chamber of Commerce office. I need to go back to the guest house. It's maybe 6 o'clock in the evening. Sharma is not there, my driver. So I have my boots on and my rain cap and my umbrella, and I just decide I'm not waiting any longer. I'm going. And so it's not that far. It's across the paved street, and then you start walking up this, what is normally a fairly hard-packed dirt road. But on that day, in monsoon season, it was mud. I made it about halfway up, and I started to slip. And pretty soon, the inevitable happened. I slipped, fell face first in the mud. Got up, slipped again, fell face first in the mud. Got up, slipped, fell backward in the mud. By this time, Sharma is rounding the corner because he knows he's messed up. He wasn't there when he was supposed to be. He comes, picks me up off the ground, gets me sorted out, gets me in the truck. I am covered with mud. Drives me up to the guest house. Mrs. Nadik is out in the yard tending her apples with her rain slicker on. She sees me get out of the truck. She begins laughing, runs and gets her whole family. They're out there, and everyone is laughing, including me by this time. And she ran around to the side of the house, filled a bucket with water, and literally just threw the water on me to try to get the mud off. And they were spraying me with stuff, pouring water on me. Eventually, they got enough mud off. I got in the house, got a shower, got dried out, had a nice meal with the Nadiks, and it was just that kind of experience in that kind of country. Just beautiful, wonderful, happy people. The work that I did there, as I said, lasts to this day. The National Chamber of Commerce is now a vibrant part of the business community in Bhutan. And so in the next episode, I'm going to talk more about this fascinating country. I'm going to give you some of the history and some of the culture, and also introduce you to some more of the very interesting cast of characters that I met while I was there. But in the meantime, I'd like you to do a little research on Bhutan. Find where it is on a map. do a little reading about it, especially about this concept of gross national happiness, which is something unique around the world. If every country would adopt gross national happiness, we would have a much, much better world today. And that's largely because of the very visionary and insightful king of Bhutan that was in place while I was there. So more to come in the next episode as we do a deep dive into Bhutan's history, culture, and geopolitical environment. Until then, I hope you enjoyed the episode today, and we'll see you next time on some stops along the way.